This is my friend Iyla.
This is my friend Hayden.
And this is What's the Talk About? A podcast about, well, anything.
And everything. Hey guys. We're back after we ghosted you a little bit from our last one. We hope you listened to that one. We enjoyed making that one. We're gonna start off like we always do with our rose and our thorn. So Hayden, you go first.
Okay. My rose is that I just had a pool party yesterday and it was super fun. And my thorn is that I have my ACT next Saturday, so I'm really worried for that.
That's a big thorn. My rose is that we are going to see the Marias on the 15th, and we're super excited. My thorn is that we only have basically less than a month of summer left, and it's really making me uncomfortable. And I'm low-key scared. But, we just forget about that. Everything's pretty good. Yeah. Okay.
So, Iyla, what are we talking about today?
Hayden, we are talking about the immigration crisis, which has been happening this year. And, throughout our history of America. In this episode, we are diving into one of the most pressing and polarizing issues facing our country. So that is the immigration crisis. And today we're going to unpack what's happening, why it matters, and how it affects entire communities.
Yeah, and just in the first quarter of 2025, ICE has deported over 271,000 people, which is the highest level in nearly a decade. But notably, a large portion were non-criminal immigrants. And reminder, being present in the United States without legal documentation is not a crime.
Yes, very important.
Yes, and we will be talking about this over the course of a series, so there'll be more episodes to come.
This is our mini-series, which isn't really mini because it's a very pressing issue and it deserves a lot of time. I do want to preface that we obviously do not know everything about this subject.
Yeah.
We are learning just as you guys are. We're here to kind of help you guys understand as well as us. And yeah, we're just, finding out new things every day.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Okay. So first we're going to get started with the really, really early history of immigration in the United States. So before 1882, immigration to the U.S. was mostly unregulated. If you could get here, you could stay. People arrived from all over Europe, especially from Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. There was no federal immigration system. States handled immigration. There was no visa process, no quotas, just entry and settlement. But this open-door policy wasn't truly open for everyone. Native Americans were being displaced. Enslaved Africans were brought forcibly. So even in the so-called era of freedom, race and power shaped who was welcome and who was not. So now jumping into 1882, this year marks a turning point. The US government began restricting immigration for the first time. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first law to ban immigration based on nationality or race. It prohibited Chinese laborers from entering the country. It was born from economic anxiety and deep-seated racism, especially on the West Coast. This act set a precedent that immigration could be controlled based on ethnicity. From the 1890s to 1924, over 20 million immigrants arrived mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe: Italians, Poles, Jews, and other fleeing poverty or persecution. In 1892, Ellis Island opened as a federal immigration processing station. Immigrants faced health inspections, name changes, and anxiety, but for many, it was a gateway to a new life. Several of my family members actually immigrated to the U.S. through Ellis Island, and I was able to visit a few years ago, which was pretty cool.
Mine too, actually.
Yeah. I think a lot of Americans can relate to that story for sure. Anyways, public sentiment started shifting. The year 1924 brought one of the most controversial immigration laws in U.S. history, the Immigration Act of 1924, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act. It created quotas based on national origin, heavily favoring Northern Europeans. It banned all immigration from Asia, which is sort of similar to the policies we're seeing today. It limited Southern and Eastern Europeans, virtually shutting the door on Jews fleeing Nazism in the 1930s. This system was in place for over 40 years. In 1965, during the Civil Rights era, the U.S. made a monumental shift. The Immigration and Nationality Act, also called the Hart-Celler Act, ended the national origins quota system, focused on family reunification and skilled labor. This led to a huge wave of immigration from Asia, Latin America, and Africa, transformed the racial and ethnic makeup of America, and it's still the foundation of our system today. The next few decades were marked by debates about undocumented immigration, border security, and amnesty. In 1986, President Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which legalized about 3 million undocumented immigrants. In the 1990s, immigration surged again, especially from Mexico and Central America, and of course, policies toughened. Deportations increased and border security expanded. Terrorism also changed immigration policy. After September 11, 2001, immigration became a matter of national security. The Department of Homeland Security was created, visa scrutiny increased, the U.S. started fingerprinting foreign visitors, and refugee admissions were reduced, and Muslim communities felt targeted. Security, identity, and fear became central themes. In the past decade, immigration has remained one of the most divisive issues in American politics. Deferred action for childhood arrivals gave protection to undocumented immigrants brought here as children. Family separation policies at the border sparked outrage under the Trump administration. Travel bans, asylum restrictions, and Title 42 expulsions defined U.S. immigration during the late 2010s and early 2020s. As of now, debates continue over pathways to citizenship, border control, and how the U.S. defines compassion and sovereignty.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to how it's worked previously, and not talking about the 1800s, but obviously more recently. So immigration laws have been previously governed by the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA. So the INA actually allows 675,000 permanent immigrant visas. But each year, the president is required to consult Congress and set an annual number of refugees to lend to the U.S. through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Once someone is granted a visa, they can apply for LPR, which is actual lawful permanent residence. So after 5 years, immigrants can apply for full U.S. citizenship. And there are temporary visas that some athletes use, entertainers, religious workers, and workers in general. And these are called basically work visas. So obviously it takes a really long time to get to full citizenship. And I think the people that are citizens here right now and who were born here don't necessarily understand how long it takes to, get the right that they so easily have. And they definitely don't make it easy. So some of the requirements are that the U.S. citizenship, applicants have to be at least 18 years old, and they have to demonstrate continuous residency. And they also have to demonstrate good moral character and pass English and U.S. history and civics exams, which means they probably know more about American history than some of the people who voted in the last election. And they also have to pay an application fee, among other requirements. So the application fee can be about $760 by paper filing, or if you're filing online, it's $710. But I don't know if this differs. This was just one of the sources I found. It also says that it can take up to 6 to 9 months, but I do think that might be longer. This is just for applying for full citizenship. And then let's go into the Refugee Act. I know Hayden talked a little bit about this, but basically, during the fiscal year of allowed refugees in 2021, it was set at 15,000 by the Trump administration, but was subsequently raised to 62,500 by the Biden administration. And the Biden administration set the admission ceiling 225,000 people for fiscal year 2022 through the fiscal year 2024. Additionally, the Biden administration created a new priority category for certain Iraqi, Afghan, and Syrian refugees. So basically, I was just showing you guys how this differs from Trump's presidency and his, the past administration. And, so you can see the differences. Okay, now we're going to get into what's been happening kind of more recently. So that we're going to talk about Trump's last presidency from 2017 to 2021, and we're kind of going to bounce back and forth for this. Okay, so obviously we cannot discount the years he's been president, 2017 to 2021, in which he ran strict immigration policies. And he didn't necessarily fulfill the promises that he said in a lot of his rallies or whatever, of building a 2,000-mile wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, or his serious deportation policies. And I want to reiterate that those are they don't seem as dangerous as they are now. I mean, it's only 6 months in the year, and we've seen crazy stuff happen. And obviously a lot more vigorous immigration policies. But it's important to look at how he built immigration policies into his last presidency.
Yeah, and it's also definitely really hard for him to even fulfill the promises he's making regarding immigration, because it is so expensive to actually deport just one person. And so obviously his wall was gonna fail, because where do you get the funding for that? And especially this term, we've seen that Congress has been bowing down and giving him the money he wanted for deportations, especially with the quote unquote big beautiful bill,
which is something he didn't necessarily get in his first term, right?
Yeah, but money is definitely a big factor in all of this.
Right. Okay, so we're going to go through a little timeline starting in 2017. So first, he lowered the amount of immigrants allowed in the country on visas. And like I said before, the president meets with Congress to decide how many people are coming into the country and how many visas they're allowing. So he did this, and he lowered it exponentially. And he used the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services.
Then he created new barriers and stronger enforcement for people who were going to apply for permanent citizenship, which made it harder for low-income immigrants to come and stay in the United States. And like Iyla mentioned before, a lot of people are escaping their countries, their homes, in search of a better life.
Right.
And that means they're just coming with the clothes on their back. It's really hard for them to be able to afford getting lawyers and paying that $700 application fee, especially when it's really hard to get a job when you're not a U.S. citizen.
And also, if you're coming from a whole different country, I mean, the currency as well. You don't have U.S. dollars to spend. And obviously, it's hard to get into the country, and they're trying to make it that way. But I don't think people and voters necessarily understand how hard it is. Like I said before, and Hayden agrees, it's not fun. I think people are just let's just go to a different country. It's not for that. They're seeking asylum. They need a place to live. I'm sure they're not thinking of America as this wonderful place, because it isn't, and they need to realize that. But if they're seeking a better life, that just means better. And I think we need to understand that as older people and voters, especially for the next election. So next, then he made it harder for asylum seekers to get access. Just like I said, these people are seeking asylum, and they're not getting access.
And then in 2020, Trump increased immigration laws, claiming he was trying to limit the spread of COVID-19.
Yeah, that's great. So by this time, there were so many people in the courts being prosecuted. There was a backlog of more than 1 million immigration cases, therefore bringing up a question of whether due process was being initiated. This is kind of what's happening now, actually. So in some ways, we can see the repeat of his immigration policies and how they're affecting whole communities, and the right of due process.
Also, just kind of touching on the base of due process, I've seen a lot of people on the right arguing, oh well, all the other presidents have deported people too, why are you just coming after Trump? It's just Trump. And it's yes, all these other presidents have deported a bunch of people. I mean, we saw Obama deport hundreds of thousands of people during his presidency, but the thing is, he gave them due process, and Trump is just deporting people without the right to proving that they're actually these criminals that he's claiming them to be, which is a huge issue.
And it's basically built on racism and, bias. I mean, he's targeting Native Americans just because of their skin color and because they might look like they don't belong here, which is, obviously he's not following due process. And I think that's one of the most, one of our biggest concerns.
Yeah. And then also, kind of like, as I said earlier, he also tried to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is a program that provides protection from deportation and work authorization to unauthorized immigrants brought to the United States as children. It is estimated that as many as 500,000 young foreign immigrants who met eligibility criteria for DACA were unable to apply.
Yes.
And, yeah.
In summary, some people who may have not been paying attention before and are paying attention now. And obviously, I want to preface by saying that when he was in his last term, we were very young.
Yeah.
My mom would, periodically say stuff about what was happening, but I didn't really get the seriousness of the situation. And I really think I do get it now. But I also want to say that I don't think voters who voted in the 2016 election and then voted last year truly get the connection between the two and how much the last presidency, was truly a plan, a guide to his next, right? So I want to say to people who did vote for him and claimed that they didn't know he was going to be targeting immigrants or any minority, you should be shamed because it's obvious from his last presidency, if you weren't paying attention, like I get it if you weren't, but it was obvious that he was very strict on his immigration policies and he was going to keep them. And we were warned by multiple officials that he was going to continue and he was even going to buckle down even more, right?
Yeah. And I mean, this was like literally outlined in like day one of his run for candidacy.
And also in Project 2025.
Yeah.
Right?
Which he claims to not be affiliated with. But everything that has been happening has been outlined in this stupid book.
Very clear. I also want to say something I've been thinking about. I think we've become way too comfortable with blatant racism.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the actual immigration, I mean, some of it might be based on other stuff, but I think the actual immigration policies are really just based on racism. Yeah, I mean, there's not more you can say.
And I mean, it's like, even this presidency is like showing an increase in racism because our president is telling everybody who lives in this country, that everybody who's getting kicked out is a criminal.
Right.
And, you don't see white people getting deported or kicked out or, like, self-deporting. Like, it's all of these people of color and who aren't white, who are, like, self-deporting, getting deported, being told, like, they're criminals. Like, Kilmar Brego Garcia, like, he has been told, like, in the media that he is part of a gang. And
to be put in a place when you broke immigration laws, but you're not a true criminal, like you wouldn't hurt someone, to be put in a prison with murderers is baffling.
Yeah. And I just saw this one guy who self-deported, and he was a Purple Heart receiver, like he fought at Vietnam, and he was being threatened to get deported and locked up because he had a drug charge from like 20 years ago because he had PTSD from fighting for America, and he was asked to self-deport, or he'd get locked up in prison because he had marijuana charges 20 years ago.
It's definitely not a question of is he being racist?
Yeah,
he's definitely being racist, and the people targeting people who are here legally, which there is a majority of people who are here and they actually have visas, even if they are work visas, and they're being targeted, like you said. Like, it's not a question of, their personality. It's a question of if, they're going to be deported or not, just for being a different skin color, right? So now we're going to move on to
very, very recent events.
Yes. And it's only been 6 months into the year, and I don't know if I can take another 3 years. So let's get into it.
So first, on April 28th, 2025, Trump signed an executive order called Strengthening and Unleashing America's Law Enforcement. This order does two main things. First, legal support for police. Creates a system to help police officers who are accused of wrongdoing while doing their jobs. The government, with help from private law firms offering free legal services, will cover their legal costs if they're found to be unfairly targeted. But of course, being unfairly targeted means taking responsibility away from cops who commit crimes. And second, he's been rolling back oversight. It directs the Attorney General to review and possibly cancel or change federal agreements or court orders that limit how police departments operate. Basically, the government wants to remove limits or restrictions placed on police departments, even if those limits were created to prevent abuse or improve accountability.
Yes. In February 14th, 2025, the government abruptly fired 20 immigration lawyers by email. No prior warning. And 13 of these judges had not even been sworn in or started the job yet. And seven high-ranking assistant chief judges were also fired. So they were also removed 9 appeal judges who were appointed during the Biden administration and fired 4 top officials at the agency that handles immigration courts. Then on April 14th, the Department of Justice cut the number of appeal judges from 28 to 15. Finally, on April 25th, a Wisconsin judge, Hannah Duggan, was charged with a crime after she allegedly let a non-citizen leave her courtroom without being arrested by ICE, who showed up without a proper warrant. So you can see here that his administration is, limiting how many judges and limiting representation. And obviously he's targeting, the courts because that's, the way immigration goes, right?
Yeah.
It goes through the courts. So if he, puts the people that he needs to get his agenda done in those places or fires the people that don't agree with him, right? He can get what he wants. So, yeah.
Also, guys, just a reminder, America is not a one-party system.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats and the Republicans and the Independents and the Green Party and so on and so forth should all be working together. Trump shouldn't just be deciding to fire all the judges and people who are working in the government because they're Democrats. They're supposed to be working together.
I mean, I also think that's his whole MAGA agenda. I think MAGA supporters have become so incredibly polarized, and Democrats too. Yeah. I mean, totally, right? Like, oh, the Republicans suck. And then the Republicans are like, oh, the Democrats suck. And then you're just stuck with like 2 parties who don't even want to work together. And then the whole court system falls apart and like the executive system. Like, it just doesn't really work if you guys aren't working together, Okay.
Anyways, following this, multiple city officials and congressional representatives have not been granted entry into ICE detention centers.
So here's some of the examples. On June 12th, Senator Alex Padilla was violently shoved to the ground and handcuffed by security after just trying to ask a question in a press conference about the administration's ICE raids. He wasn't even trying to be in an ICE detention center or like check on the conditions there, which many of the officials are. He was literally just asking a question about the raids. So that just goes to show how much force and violence is not needed, first of all, and how much they're trying to silence, Yeah.
But also, if you're so terrified about lawmakers seeing the conditions of your prisons,
right,
and how you're treating these immigrants, then that should be a huge issue.
You should definitely have better conditions at that point, right?
And then now we're going on to some like state-specific, country-specific examples of some Trump policies.
Yeah.
That and immigration issues that we've seen. So first off, in Danbury, Connecticut, on June 16th, at least a dozen residents were detained near the courthouse, and there was no prior notice to local officials, and immigrant families faced fear, financial loss, and emotional trauma.
In Los Angeles, on June 6th, to present, mass protests erupted after ICE raids in multiple sites. So over 575 people arrested, and the LAPD, National Guard, and Marines were involved, which is crazy that he had to get the freaking Marines in there. I mean, I've seen tons of things online about this. It's for some reason that pushed, celebrities and people to actually start talking about it. And if we needed like Marines to come in for us to start talking about it and to become a conversation, then I think we really need to work on, our idea of representing ourselves and,
But also another thing is, like, I feel like at the same time, the raids in LA have taken some of the spotlight away from, because, like, LA is like a horrible, scary thing, but it's not the only place that this has been happening.
Oh yeah, I
like there's
absolutely
places
agree.
in Texas where like the National Guard has been deployed
Right.
too, and it's just because it's like these smaller towns and cities that it's not as like highly televised.
Yeah.
But like LA is not the only one that this is like happening to.
I mean, obviously they're making a big deal out of LA because, the celebrities, like I was talking about, and everything, like they're targeting the rich people. How dare they?
Mhm.
And then, that's why it's such a big deal, I guess. Okay, so serious.
And then the Los Angeles Dodgers Stadium actually borrowed ICE from accessing the parking lots, which is a really good sign because a large amount of the LA Dodgers fan base is Latino. And so the Dodgers like really showed like their support for the Los Angeles community.
And we can see this in a few places, people showing their support. And obviously, like I said, celebrities like online, they're trying to show their support, even if it's like built on the wrong things. I mean, at least they're talking about it, right? So going to more country specific, so Venezuelan deportations in March 20 this year, 137 Venezuelans were sent to El Salvador and imprisoned indefinitely with no criminal record or due process. So that's not good. Yeah.
And then since January, expedited removal rules have extended nationwide, meaning undocumented individuals can now be deported without court hearings, which means the removal of due process.
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about before. Additionally, hundreds of thousands under the Biden era parole programs from Cuba, Haiti, how do you say it? Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela have been forced toward self-deportation in the past spring.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the most recent Supreme Court ruling. So a little bit of background. In 2024, Trump issued Executive Order 14160, which attempted to reinterpret the 14th Amendment to deny birthright citizenship to children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants or non-citizen parents. Immigrant advocacy groups like Casa de Maryland sued to block enforcement of the order, and several federal judges issued nationwide injunctions preventing it from taking effect anywhere in the country. Trump's legal team appealed, arguing that nationwide injunctions are unconstitutional unless a formal class action is certified.
On June 27th this year, the court ruled 6-3 in Trump versus Casa that federal judges cannot issue blanket nationwide injunctions to block presidential policies like Executive Order 14160, unless the plaintiffs in the trial explicitly include a class action suit seeking broad relief. That means lower courts that had issued nationwide injunctions preventing enforcement of the order can now only protect the specific individuals named in their cases, so not everyone in the U.S. The court did not rule on the constitutionality of Trump's order, which seeks to stop granting automatic citizenship to children born in the U.S. to non-citizen or undocumented parents.
Since the ruling only addressed injunction scope, the order remains blocked in places where lawsuits have been filed. But may take effect in other states that haven't yet brought suits or are not part of class actions. The result could be a patchwork. Children born in different states might receive different treatment based solely on legal filings, undermining the idea of uniform birthright citizenship. Critics warn this allows the executive branch to circumvent constitutional constraints by keeping controversial orders alive in areas not yet litigated. Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson dissented, highlighting that the ruling undermines universal rights and gives presidents undue power to enforce disputed policies at will. Lower courts must now reassess their injunctions, limiting them to the named plaintiffs unless they grant class action status. New class action suits have already been filed in states like New Hampshire and Maryland, aiming to restore broader protections. A full trial on constitutionality is still pending in district courts. This decision only dealt with procedural mechanics, not the legality of the executive order itself.
Yes. Okay, we kind of wanted to end with some ICE tips, which are just tips how to deal with ICE and kind of know your rights. I did want to say that if you're one of the people that tries to say that Trump, is just withholding the Constitution and, just really such a constitutional guy, like he really isn't, and you need to look at the news and you need to hear from experts that what he's doing, first of all, the due process, that's in the Constitution. These things are in the Constitution. And if you're a true American and you love the ideals that this country is based in, which are basically the Constitution, then you need to stop supporting him because he really isn't constitutional. And we can see this here.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to move on to some tips for ICE. Okay, so first, you have the right to remain silent and do not have to discuss your immigration or citizenship status with police, immigration agents, or other officials. Anything you tell an officer can later be used against you in an immigration court.
If you're not a U.S. citizen and an immigration agent requests your immigration papers, you must show them if you have them with you.
If an immigration agent asks if they can search you, you have the right to say no. Agents do not have the right to search you or your belongings without consent or probable cause.
If you're over 18, carry your papers with you at all times. If you don't have them, tell the officer that you want to remain silent or that you want to consult a lawyer before answering any questions.
Yes.
In some states, you must provide your name to law enforcement if you are stopped and told to identify yourself. But even if you give your name, you do not have to answer to other questions. If you are driving and are pulled over, the officer can require you to show your license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. But you don't have to answer questions about your immigration status.
Custom officers can ask you about your immigration status when entering or leaving the country. If you are a lawful permanent resident, an LPR, who has maintained your status, you only have to answer questions establishing your identity and permanent residency. Refusal to answer other questions will likely cause delay, but officials may not deny you entry into the United States for failure to answer other questions. If you are a non-citizen visa holder, you may be denied entry into the U.S. if you refuse to answer officers' questions. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Like we said, we're going to make this a series. And so stay tuned for our next one. And we're really excited to, learn more about this.